So I wanted to talk a little bit about attacking web applications. This is going to be a quick high-level video. We're not going to get too far into the details here. But web applications are becoming more and more prevalent. They're becoming more and more complex. There are more pieces to it. As we move to the web, there's more functionality that are put into websites that make for a higher level of attack surface. So we start with a user. The user interfaces with the presentation layer. So this is where the cascading style sheets are. This is where a lot of the programming logic that goes to make a pleasant experience when using the web. So some of the nice flows, pretty presentations, pretty diagrams and stuff, that all happens at the presentation layer. Underneath that is a services layer. This is the layer where we don't really have to make things pretty and palatable to human eyes. This is where external systems interface with a system and they just want data. This is where your APIs are programmed, so systems just hooks into it and just drags data for being processed by something else. Then there's the business layer. The business layer is where we put some of the business logic around the website. So here's where we're talking some of the analytics comes in. This is where we do some access control stuff. This is where, so if there is a discontinued item in the database, we don't want it to show it, but we want to maintain that data. The business layer does a transaction there. So it filters out this item so that it's not shown to the user or other external systems. And here's the data layer. This is where the access to the data sources are programmed. So this is where we put in where we want to hook into which databases, and other services are also use this. So where the external systems interact with the services layer, the data layer may also interact with another system service layer to pull in data and process it. All of these layers have to have security built into it. So each one of these portions have to have controls. They have to have mitigations in place to keep an attacker out. So the attack surface is broader, making it a little bit more difficult for defenders to secure. And to add on to that, there's all the infrastructure around your website. So here's a screen grab that I got from an identity management solution. There's a global load balancer. So if you're coming from Europe, they want to automatically send you to the London data center. Whereas if you're coming from the Americas, you go to the New York data center. Then you have the reverse proxy that manages the sessions between your web application and other applications. And then your web application hooks into your identity management solution, which has its own infrastructure, more database, more web sources, more replication happening between the data centers. So these are all complexities built into the website that are typically non-transparent to the end user. So to go after this sort of thing, you have to basically go back to the trusty diagram. We follow this process all over again. We try to do recon to figure out what services are built into the website, what infrastructure may be associated with the website. Then we're talking about doing our threat modeling and then vulnerability analysis. This whole process starts all over again. You have to spend a good amount of time doing your reconnaissance because, like I said, all those different portions of the website need to be accounted for if you're going to attack it. So here I've opened up Burp Suite. It's a free tool for working with web applications and figuring out how they work. We're going to go through all the tabs here and just kind of see high level what they do. We're not going to go too far into the weeds on any of these things, but let's get an intro to the tool. So the target is basically keeps track of your sitemap, what you're going against. So the first thing, let's try to set up our browser to use Burp Suite. Burp functions as a proxy. So we can send all of our web traffic through the proxy so that it captures it, where we can do manipulations on its way to the website prior to it reaching it. So first thing we have to do is set our browser to use the proxy. So let's go in here, we go into preferences, preferences. We scroll down to the bottom and we configure how Firefox connects to the internet. Now we're setting it to use the 127.0.0.1 and port 8080, which by default is where the proxy is configured. So it's set to use 127.0.0.1 port 8080. So let's set that. We can see we're already starting to get traffic flowing through Burp Suite. So let's go ahead and drop this first, because I want to show whenever we go to a site like just espn.com, just how much traffic, how many different websites we're going to. So I'm going to go ahead and turn intercept off. So instead of capturing all the traffic, Burp is just going to forward it onto the website. And here, just by going to ESPN, we see it pulling in all these websites already. So if we're just going to we think we're just going to websites, one website, but really we're seeing ESPN, we're seeing some Google stuff, we're seeing some Disney stuff, which is owned by ESPN, or which owns ESPN. We're seeing Twitter, social media, all this stuff just from going from one site. So we can kind of get a feel for how just going to one site, how automatically all the different interactions, all the different services that a website might be leveraging. So I'm going to go ahead and close this for now. And let's talk about some of the tabs here. So in the target tab, the site map, just like we mentioned, we're seeing all the sites that we're going to already. The bold ones are sites that we're actually interfacing with, and the grayed out ones that are a little bit that we haven't actually gone to, but Burp sees that we have a path to that website. And here's the scope. So scope is the websites that we can use all the automated actions against. So whenever we want to spider a website, for example, we can just go to there, right click on it, and then add it to scope. And we see that it's pulled in right here. So whenever we want to do any automated actions, the scope is where by default it goes through. So let me go ahead and remove that first. All right, so the proxy tab. The proxy tab is whenever we go to a website, it does an intercept where we can modify the traffic being sent in prior to being sent to the website. So let's try to go to, let's go to google.com. The proxy intercepted, let me drop these. This is more traffic just being automatically sent from my browser. But it automatically says, okay, here, I'm going to Google, it sees my request. If I want to change what's going into this request, I can change it here. So if I wanted to change the host or my user agent, it's a good example right here. If I wanted to change my user agent, I can do that here. Instead, I'm just going to forward it. You see another request coming in from Google with more cookie information. So if I wanted to modify the cookies, I could change it here before sending it on, and so forth. HTTP history is an important tab because it tells you basically your history. So it's telling you what you're sending to the website and when. So you can get a feel for how the systems are interacting with other services. So you see that it gives you numbers 1 through 125 already websites it's seen them going to. So it gives you a feel for, okay, I went to cdn.espn first, and then after that I get to cdn.registerdn or registered Disney after that. So it can give you a kind of path of how all these things interact with each other. WebSockets, same thing, except for WebSockets. And here are your options. You can change which port and IP address your listener's listening on. You can also in here, when you intercept requests, you can modify automatically. So when we were talking about user agents before, instead of doing that manually, let's just have it, okay, I'm going to automatically change the user agent to, instead of be Mozilla, I can have it be an iPhone so that it emulates an iPhone device, iOS, and then I just set that to enable. And I want to do that because sometimes a website will present differently for iOS than it would at Android or things like that. So you can build in some logic here to automatically do those changes for you, and you don't have to manually go through. So a few more options down here, but I think we get the point here. So here's the spider. So spider, the way this works is it goes and looks at what you have in scope, and then you run the spider, and the spider basically follows all the links on that website. So instead of having to manually browse through clicking things, you can have Burp do it for you to complete the sitemap here of all the different branches that a website might have. You can set some options in here. You can tell it to go the max link depth of 5. So if you're on ESPN.com at the root, it'll only go 5 branches down. Also in the spidering, you can have it fill in some information for you. So you know how if you go to a website, you're setting up a new account, you type in your name, address, phone number, stuff like that. You can have it fill it in for you and automatically populate that information. It gives you the option to not submit forms, period, because you want to be careful when you're doing spidering. You could end up hitting a sensitive website and you tell it to submit a form, and when you on submit, it deletes data out of the database, out of the website. So you have to be careful when using spider. Typically, I try to just browse everything manually, because that way I can get a feel for where I can note where all the input forms are and get a feel for the website's logic that way. Spidering can be pretty dangerous. So I personally tend to stay away from it, but it depends on the website. Scanner is a licensed portion for Burp Suite. So if you want to pay for a license, Scanner automatically goes through and looks for vulnerabilities for you. Intruder is another powerful piece of Burp Suite. So it allows you to go in and you can automatically use some payloads. This is where you do a lot of your fuzzing. So if you go to Intruder in the Positions tab, I'm going to go ahead and clear here. So say, for instance, you're sending some post data to a website. You can go in here and say, okay, this field, I want to do some fuzzing with a list, or we'll go into that a little bit more later. So repeater takes out of the equation the browser. So if you want to go in and modify some data, instead of going back and forth between the browser, you can just send it to repeater and just see what the response is here in this window. So you say, okay, I modify my cookie or modify my user agent. Instead of trying to go in through the browser, it'll just show up right here, and you can render the website here and see what the differences are. Sequencer is used to basically test the entropy of some of the cookies or any other encryption that a website might be using. So it'll go through and do some analysis to see how random how random a cookie might be or a session is. And if it's not random enough, then we might be able to leverage that to take over somebody else's session. Decoder, it's a nice tool. If you have something that's URL decoded, you can put it in here and it'll decode it for you. Or if you have something that you need to encode to be URL encoded, so you have a string that you want to send over that might have a payload in there, then you can encode it to be URL and then submit that to the website, and it'll process it without it being filtered through. Compares, just like it sounds, it compares two different sections of data of the website and tells you what the differences are. Extender, so this is where the flexibility comes in for Burp Suite. The extender, you can program your own modules in Burp Suite. So you see I have an extension here for SQL map if I want for built into Burp Suite. So somebody went in and they coded SQL map so that you can just plug it into Burp Suite without having to run a different tool. There's also a Faraday plugin for if you want to do some coordination with other pen testers. So the extender, there are some extensions that are already out there on the internet that might be able to, here it is in the App Store. So there are all these tools right here that you can go through and just have it tacked on to your Burp Suite session. It'll add it onto here. So this is what makes Burp Suite extra. So the Intruder tab is probably best to show you and do a quick demo to give you a feel for what's going on. So I'm going to pull up Matilde, which is a purposely vulnerable web application meant to just test your hacking abilities to see what you can break into and what you can learn. So we're going to focus on try to do a LFI vulnerability, which is local file inclusion. So this website, the functionality is if you click view file, it'll basically just show you the contents of that file. So the developers gave you a drop-down list of files that they want you to get it or want you to be able to access. And we're going to see if we can do more with it though. So let's go ahead and turn the intercept back on and check view file again. So here, the text file, it's telling us to go to textfile.com, the /2f, %2s with URL encoding for a slash. So if you just hover over it, it'll give you what the URL encoding is, equivalent is. But instead of that file, we're going to see if we can just look at index.php. And we're going to send that over to the website. So instead of the file that we had in the drop-down list, we changed it to index.php. So now we can read the code of the website. Now we're going to go back to target. Let's go ahead and send this to repeater. So we send that to repeater. So instead of index.php, I'm going to put in // Etsy password and just click go. So there. Now we're reading the file, the Etsy password file. So now we can see the different usernames in here. So this syntax, the // that basically means go up a directory. So when we're on the website, we don't know which directory the system is actually reading this data from. So just by putting a bunch of // in front of it, it takes us back up to root. So for example, if I look at my present working directory, pwd, it says that I'm in root. But if I do change directory // and then do pwd, now I'm up to the root of the folder. So the reason that you want to put a bunch of // is that you don't know how deep in the directory you go. So you want to try to get all the way back up to root and then try to browse so that you know where your start state is. It doesn't hurt anything to put extra // so it's might as well just throw a bunch in there. Okay. So now that we know that we've gotten this file, so how do we see what else we can possibly get? So let's go ahead and send this to Intruder. So instead of going in and manually typing in these different potential paths, Intruder is a good tool to just automatically see what it can fill in. So here you go to positions. What it does is it tries to be smart and figure out what you may want to look at. So I tend to just clear these all and then go in and then add the variable. So this is the position. Oh, let me go ahead and clear that. This is the position where I want to try to see what I can get. So this is basically just a random variable that I'm going to try to populate with my payload here. So here the payload is, you have a bunch of different options. Simple list, it'll substitute characters for you. It'll do some bit flipping. It'll just add some sequences in for you. But here I'm just going to do a simple list. I've already got from the FuzzDB. It's if you Google it on GitHub, it's a list of different fuzz variables that you can use. The FuzzDB already has a list of potential local file inclusion paths, and it's got them for Windows and it's got them for Linux. So I'm going to go ahead and use the common Linux for error logs. I'm also going to use this list for other potential interesting files. And you see the list has some of these / slashes in there for you. Again, the extra ones don't hurt. So then I'm just going to go ahead and run this. It tells you how many different payloads potential that you have, and then it's just going to run through them all. It tells you if you get a 200, so it's responding back with something, or if it errors out, you can get a 200, 400, 500. It gives you the length of the page files. All this it's doing for me, so I don't have to do 897 different iterations by hand. So go ahead and let this go through. So how do I sort through all of these? So what I do is I do it by length. Typically, if something errors out, it'll have basically around the same number. So let's say, let me check proc command line. We can see the response that we get back in there. It's nice that you can just render it in here too, so you don't have to try to interpret the code. So nothing really interesting there. Let's try if we do etc resolve.conf. Now resolve.conf did come back with information. It tells me what DNS servers we have. Let's see if there's some etc sudoers. Let's see here. Sudoers are privileged accounts. We got a permission denied on that one, which means that I can try to access it, but the account that's running the website doesn't have access or root privileges. And this pure FTP, this is the error that I get basically when when that file doesn't exist, it seems. So I can look through and see, okay, everything that has this size, it's 24709, it's probably a file that doesn't exist on the server. So that's how I can kind of filter through these. But this is the power of Intruder. You can automate a lot of these manual tasks instead of going through. All right, so let's talk about the different positions. So there are different attack types that you can use in Intruder. Sniper is just one for one, just bam. I have a simple list. I want you to check one variable. I want you to check that one item in the list and go through each one and just check that one. Battering ram, it uses the single set of payloads, but it iterates through the payload. So it puts a payload into all the defined payload positions at once. So if I had a marker here and a marker here, the battering ram would put that same one in both locations. Pitchfork uses multiple payload sets. So when I go back here, I can set how many payloads I want. So if I go back here and set Pitchfork, and then let's say, add another one there, I can have different payload sets. So now that I have two different positions, I can set two different payload sets. The first one's simple list. Let's see here. So Pitchfork allows me to use multiple different payload sets. So I can attack different positions simultaneously. So it can take position 1, payload 1, and then if I have a separate payload set, it'll take payload set 2, position 1. So it's basically like, it looks like a pitchfork going down each payload sets. Whereas Cluster Bomb tries every single iteration of all your multiple payload sets. So if I have 2 payload sets, it checks the first one of the first payload, the first one of the second payload, then the second one of the first payload, the first one of the first payload. So it makes sure it goes through each different combination, just like a cluster bomb. So that's essentially it for this portion. Just wanted to familiarize you with the different tabs and different functionality that's associated with Burp Suite.